Welcome back to Rhodes Reads. Today, reading from The Ranger's Apprentice, Book 3, The Icebound Land. This is where I'm currently reading right now and loving it, loving the series overall. I'm on chapter 20, so that's where I'm starting up today. Let's get started. An hour after sunset, Halt and Horace left their room and went downstairs to the tap room of the inn for dinner. The innkeeper's wife had prepared a huge pot of savory stew. It hung simmering in the enormous fireplace that dominated one side of the room. A serving girl brought them large wooden bowls of the steaming food, along with a curious long loaf of bread shaped in the style Horace had never seen before. They were very long and narrow, so they looked like thick sticks rather than loaves. But they were crusty on the outside and delightfully light and airy on the inside. And the apprentice soon discovered they were an ideal tool for mopping up the delicious gravy of the stew. Halt had accepted a large beaker of red wine with his meal. Horace had settled for water. Now, having enjoyed a large serving of a delicious berry pie, they sat over mugs of an excellent coffee. Horace spooned a large helping of honey into his cup, watched with a frown by the ranger. "Killing the taste of good coffee," Halt muttered to himself. Horace merely grinned. He was getting used to his companion's mock severity by now. "It's a habit I learned from your apprentice," he told him. And for a moment they were both silent, thinking of Will, wondering what had become of him and Evelyn, hoping they were both safe and well. Halt finally roused them from their thoughtful mood by nodding toward a small group of townspeople seated by the fire. He and Horace had taken a table at the back of the room. It was always Halt's way to do this, keeping his back to a solid wall and sitting where he could observe the rest of the room and, at the same time, remain relatively inconspicuous himself. While they were eating, the room had gradually filled with townspeople, either coming to eat or to enjoy a few jugs of wine or beer before heading to their own homes. Now, the ranger had noticed one of the room's inhabitants had produced a set of pipes from inside his pack, and another was fiddling with the tuning pegs on a gourd-shaped, 8-stringed instrument. "Looks like the entertainment's about to start," he told Horace. And as they spoke, the other people in the room began pulling their chairs closer to the fire and calling for refills from the innkeeper and his serving assistants. The piper began playing a lament, and the string instrument quickly took up a counterpart, playing rapid, vibrating strokes, to form a continuous, high treble background to the soaring, swooping melody. The pipes themselves filled the room with a wild and plaintive sound. A voice that reached deep into the soul and brought thoughts of friends long gone and times past to the forefront of the listener's mind. As the notes echoed around the room, Halt found himself remembering long summer days in the forest surrounding Castle Redmont, and a small, busy figure who asked endless questions and brought a new feeling of energy and interest to life. In his mind's eye, he could see Will's face, hair tousled by the cowl of his cloak, brown eyes alight and filled with an irresistible sense of fun. He remembered him as he cared for Tug, remembered the pride the boy had shown at the prospect of having a horse of his own, and the special bond that had formed between the two of them. Perhaps it was because Halt could feel his years encroaching on him as the gray hairs of his beard became more the norm than the exception. But Will had brought a sense of youth and fun and vitality to his life, a sense that was a welcome contrast to the dark and dangerous path that a ranger was often required to tread. He remembered, too, the pride he had felt when Horace had told him of the way Will took it up upon himself to follow the Wargle forces in Celtica, and how the boy had stood alone against the Wargles and Scandians, as Evelyn had worked to make sure the fire took hold on the bridge. There was more to Will than just an irrepressible spirit. There was courage and ingenuity and loyalty. The boy would have made a truly great ranger, Halt thought, then abruptly realized that he had thought of Will as if such an eventuality were no longer possible. His eyes moistened with tears as he shifted uncomfortably. It was a long time since Halt had shown any outward sign of emotion. Then he shrugged. Will was worth at least a few tears from a grizzled old wreck like himself, he thought, and made no move to wipe them away. He glanced sideways at Horace to see if the boy had noticed, but Horace was entranced by the music. Leaning forward on the bench they shared, his lips slightly parted, one finger beating time unconsciously on the rough tabletop. It was as well, Halt thought, smiling ruefully to himself. It wouldn't do for the boy to see him dissolving into tears at the first sound of sad music. Rangers, particularly treasonous ex-rangers, who had insulted the king, were supposed to be made of sterner stuff. The music finally ended to a roar of applause from the audience in the room. Halt and Horace joined in enthusiastically, and Halt used the moment to covertly dash a hand across his eyes and wipe away the traces of moisture there. He noticed that the performers were being rewarded by the audience with coins tossed into a hat that had been artfully left, upturned on the floor beside them. He shoved a couple of coins toward Horace and nodded toward the players. "Give them these," he said. "They've earned it." Horace nodded, wholeheartedly agreeing, and rose to cross the room, ducking his head under the heavy beams that supported the ceiling. He tossed the coins into the cap, the last in the room to do so. The piper looked up, saw an unfamiliar face, and nodded his thanks. Then he began to pump the bellows on his pipes with his elbow again. And once more, the haunting voices of the pipes swelled up and began to fill the room. Horace hesitated, loath to move now that another song had begun. He glanced back to where Halt sat in the shadows, shrugged, and settled down onto a tabletop at the edge of the small crowd surrounding the performers. There was a different tone to this piece. There was a subtle note of triumph in the melody, augmented by the bold major chords struck by the stringed instrument, which came more to the fore in this piece. Indeed, before too long, the brittle, rippled notes of the gourd-shaped instruments had wrested the lead from the pipes and set toes tapping and hands clapping time throughout the room. A delighted smile broke out on Horace's face, and as the door to the street opened and a gust of wind swept around the room, he barely took notice of the newcomer who had entered. Others did, however, and Halt, senses finely honed by years of living through dangerous situations, felt a change in the atmosphere. In the room, a sense of apprehension and almost suspicion seemed to grip the people around the musicians. There was even a slight hesitation in the tune as the piper glanced up and saw a man who had entered. Just the slightest break in rhythm, almost imperceptible, but enough for Halt to notice. I hope you enjoyed this reading today of The Ranger's Apprentice, Book 3, The Icebound Land. This is the first half of Chapter 20. If you did like this and you are enjoying this channel, consider leaving a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel. And I'll see you on the next video.